So Bill has asked me to read a number of quotes as his reading for today. The first one is from Eleanor Roosevelt. A mature person is one who does not think only in absolutes, who is able to be objective even when deeply stirred emotionally, who has learned that there is both good and bad in all people and in all things, and who walks humbly and deals charitably with the circumstances of life, knowing that in this world no one is all-knowing, and therefore all of us need both love and charity. The second is from Desmond Tutu. Our maturity will be judged by how well we are able to agree to disagree, and yet continue to love one another, to care for one another, and cherish one another, and seek the greater good of the other. And the last two are from Anne Frank. Everyone has inside of him a piece of good news. The good news is that you don't know how great you can be, how much you can love, what you can accomplish, and what your potential is. It's difficult in times like these. Ideals, dreams, and cherished hopes rise within us, only to be crushed by grim reality. It's a wonder I haven't abandoned all my ideals. They seem so absurd and impractical. Yet I cling to them because I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart.
Peace and grace to each of you from Jesus, who was and is the event of grace, the person and presence of courage and creativity and compassion, and a love that could melt a star and transform the world. Amen. I was looking over notes on the sermons that I wrote for 2020. There are not a lot of them, but I realized that they kind of had this thread running through all of them, and that was how upsetting I'll get it. I'll put it here. How upsetting, is that good, this one? Okay, this year has been. It's almost a feeling like the world was tipped upside down. And it feels huge, it feels monumental. It doesn't feel like something that is, well, something that we're going to bounce back from quickly and easily and smoothly. It is something cataclysmic, and what in biblical terms they called apocalyptic, meaning that it was so sharp and so divisive that it literally just rent life and the earth and the world in two. Powerful stuff. One of the things that I thought about for 2020 was that there were certain events that created this kind of monumental feeling about the year. The first one was really wonderful because James, my new grandson, who was born November 14th, I haven't seen him yet, so when I move out there, it'll be the first time I get to see him. Although I gotta be quarantined for 10 days before I can hold him. I'm gonna be chapped from blowing kisses. But the reality is that one thing that was just so moving to me was the transformation in my son. I didn't realize, there are certain things that you don't realize about your children until you ask, it's like a revelation. I mean, it's like the curtain goes up and you finally get to play it. When Christine died very suddenly when he was 17 years old, I didn't realize this, but all of the joy in him left. I really am sincere in saying, I didn't realize this. It wasn't that he didn't have friends or a social life, or that he wasn't happy on occasion, but all of a sudden, when James was born, his joy was back. He enjoyed everything. He enjoyed everything. Everything about taking care of this kid. He didn't complain about any. I thought he'd be complaining all the time about, oh, I'm so tired and it's so much work, but nothing. He loves it all. So that was wonderful. But then we had this pandemic thing hit. And all I can say to you is, I'm not a believer that we are always being sent messages. I don't even know if I really believe that there's a reason for everything. But I certainly don't have any problem with somebody who does believe that, because I don't know. That's why they call it faith. You know, all faith is a leap. It's not knowledge. That's why they call it faith. But the reality is that I felt about the pandemic that we could be having an experience that was louder and clearer and more prophetic, that was saying, you had better learn how to come together as one. Because this is going to affect everyone, everywhere, and probably for a long, long time. It was almost as if in my heart and in my soul that all the borders of the countries just kind of faded away, just like, okay, talk borders if you want to, but wherever you were hearing from, Germany, France, Greece, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Mexico, Paraguay, who knows, they all were struggling with the same thing. All struggling with the same thing. So the pandemic was just swarming, and now, I have to admit, it's stunning to be where we are now. Because it's like starting all over again. And that's really powerful, you know? That's like being the kid who has worked very hard at the beach to build that sandcastle and make it beautiful and have towers and turrets and moats and all the rest of it. And all of a sudden some teenager comes by and goes, whoa, smashes it to smithereens. And then I had the experience that I never thought I would have of witnessing what transpired in Kenosha. And for me, I have to say, it was so strange how me-centered we really are, because my big thing about what happened in Kenosha was that I had 12 rolls of film at Brody's camera shop, and they were destroyed. It was, those were all my pictures from the spring. But then when I called those guys to tell them how bad I felt, all you felt was, wow, in an instant, in a moment, it's gone. I will say this to you, the one thing that I just couldn't believe was I remembered so clearly listening to the speeches from Parkland, Florida, that were about, after the violence that killed 17 kids there at that high school. And every single kid that spoke before that parade said the same thing, which was, when are you going to do something about this? When are you adults going to address something about gun control? I have to admit, over the course of the year, watching Canada come up with measures on gun control in 2 weeks, and watching Australia come up with it in 3 days. But the most significant thing for me, I will admit, was the compassion that I felt for that young boy. Even when I see him now, I feel compassion for him, and yet he is not a hero, and he is not a patriot. And having a 17-year-old march down our streets with an assault weapon, but what I feel for is that how on earth did he get caught up in this neo-Nazi crap? How did that happen? And you see him look at his mom and weep, and look at his mom and weep. And then I had an experience that I can't put into words. There are a lot of things in life that are deeply spiritual, that are like when the stones speak, okay? They defy words. You can't find the words for it. You really can't. You're left dumbstruck. It took my breath away. You get a lump in the throat. Very powerful things, and they are just incredible. I've been working for the last 9 months on a book with Manuel Barrera, who was my best friend in high school. He was also the center on the football team, and I was the quarterback. Yes, believe it or not. The svelte days, we call it. Okay. Shush. Yeah, okay. But anyways, it was just the most delightful 9 months, because all of it, we called each other on our 70th birthday and exchanged greetings. And it led to discussion after discussion about legacy. Over the course of the time, I also got to talk to Manuel's wife, Aurelia, who, to be honest with you, I've never met. You know, that's how life goes, isn't it? You know, our lives are intimate, and the contact is regular, and then all of a sudden, it's just gone. I said to Aurelia at one point, I said, Aurelia, what do you do? And she laughed. She said, you really don't know me, do you? I said, no. I said, I know he loved you to pieces. I know that when I asked him what his love for you was like, that he said that my tears rolled down my wife's cheeks. I thought, well, that tells me a lot. But Aurelia had spent 2020 working at the wall. And she said to me, she said, you know, when you get a chance to hold a little boy or girl who's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, and she said, and they are small, and they seem to become even smaller in pain because they're just frozen. Frozen. They're just like, whoa. She said, because you look in their eyes and you realize they don't know where they are. They don't know why they're there. They don't know where their families are. And they don't know where they're going. And she said, when I look into their eyes, Bill, she said, there's no bottom. There's just no bottom. It's an emptiness. It's just, and their little faces wince and pucker. It just wince and pucker. And And then she said, and this is a powerful thing, she said, there's no bottom, and I hope that this is the bottom for this nation. Because we have to be so much better than this. How can we not be better than this? Recently, I remembered something that had happened when I was in my first years of ministry at Bayshore Lutheran Church in Whitefish Bay. I used to fly out to Los Angeles to spend time with my closest and dearest friend, Bob Schober, and his wife, Jan. And I love doing this because it was a great opportunity to be in Los Angeles, and it was a great opportunity to see good friends. But the biggest thing of all was that I am a movie buff beyond belief. And so movies there started around 10 o'clock in the morning. So when Bob would go to work and Jan would go to work, I would go to movies. So this day in Los Angeles, I was going to a movie called Pele the Conqueror. Dates me. I was going to this movie, and I'm walking down the street in Beverly Hills to go to the Beverly Hills Cinema. And all of a sudden, I felt myself lean to the left and lean to the right, kind of like a cheer, stand up, sit down. But I didn't do the stand up and sit down, fight thing. I felt like, what the heck? Am I going to faint? And it made me nervous, because you're always thinking about what might happen health-wise. I got into the theater, and I love sitting way at the back on the aisle, so no one sees me with my bucket of popcorn at 10 o'clock. But I'm sitting in the back there, and the previews start coming on, and all of a sudden I saw the middle of the theater do this. And I went, I've never been in an earthquake. I think this is an earthquake. What do we do now in an earthquake? I will tell you this. I don't think I've had things that emotionally were earthquakes and spiritually were earthquakes, but the physical reality of an earthquake absolutely paralyzes you. It's just boom. I couldn't move. I didn't know whether to stand, stay seated, etc. And then it stopped, and you have this relief, and then 15 minutes later they have the after boom, 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 boom. Oh, it was so awful. That experience is what 2020 in a very real way has been like. A shaking of the foundations, and it's been paralyzing. And you have to ask the question, where do I go from here? What do you do? And I think as people all over the world are really asking themselves questions about where we go from here. What's this going to be like? What's this world going to be like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50? What's it going to be like for our children? What's it going to be like for our grandchildren? How do we find hope in the midst of this? How do we love in the midst of this? How do we create justice in the midst of this? In a very real way, I think that for many of us, the issue is, worrying about stuff and material goods and the bank account. It's just like, really? Really? Where do we go from here? Well, a couple weeks ago, I was sitting and having coffee, which is my habit. Very hot, lots of cream. And I love my coffee. I've had many people try to talk me out of my coffee. And they will not be named. Because they have disappeared from my life. No, I'm kidding, but I really like coffee. So I'm sitting there, and lo and behold, of all the people that should come to mind, come to memory, and offer me an answer of where we go from here, it's Jerry Fishbane. Hey, John. John, how you doing? You know something? I really hope that Fishbane hears this sermon at some point. So I want him to know there are so many young men from Horlick High School that think back on your leadership and your tenacity and your energy. Now, by the way, we're not talking about that he was popular and beloved when you were in the program. Okay? At that time, many times you wanted to take his legs and make a wish, you know? But now you look back and realize all the energy he poured in to wanting us to be our best. Well, we had had a horrible week of practice. I mean, lousy. In fact, it was so lousy that he broke a helmet over my head. I mean, he broke a clipboard over my helmet on my head. That's better. Yeah, otherwise this would have been a wonderful abuse story, but no, it wasn't. No, he actually, he just went up and he went boom, and the clipboard broke in half over my helmet. And the thing that was so memorable about that is that Manuel was laughing. And Manuel was one of the kindest, softest, shyest people on earth, and he was just howling. Now the reason why was that I had dropped back for a pass in running this play, with one little problem. I didn't have the ball. Okay? The ball was wobbling on the ground right under Manuel's butt. I had never gotten a snap, but I just automatically went, I got back, and I'm like this, literally like this, and that's when Jerry Fishbane walked over and went, boom! You know, it just said, where are you? And it was like, The next day, it was a Wednesday, he said at the beginning of practice, we're going to be here for an extra hour, you know, and then you have this. And he said, because today, friends, we're going to learn how to play football. We're going back to the basics. And so now, will all the guards come forward? All the offensive linemen, please come forward, and we're going to learn how to block. And then we're going to learn how to block. And then he said, we're going to learn how to tackle. We're going to learn how to do a handoff. We're going to learn how to do a forward pass. We're going to learn how to do a kickoff and an extra. And we went over it and over it and over it. Just. Now, I hate saying this. To this day, I hate saying this. I hate admitting it helped. We were just in a rut, you know? My grandma always said that a rut and a grave, the only difference was the depth. Yeah, which I thought was pretty good. But you know, the reality is that we just were. We were just not there. And so, in recent weeks, I have really gone back to the basics of my faith. And what I want to say to you fundamentally today is, I hope you'll do the same. Now, I've changed in where my faith is at, okay, big time. You each have your own faith. One of the great things about sacred journeys is that you celebrate that. That is not an issue for you. Because this is not a church that is bound to creeds or dogmas or doctrines or polity or organizational stuff. So you get to have your own faith. And to be perfectly honest with you, you all have one. It is your own. It comes from your stories, your life, your mercy, your tenderness. You create it. When I went back to the basics of my faith and said, well, Grimbol, where do we go from here? You have to go, first and foremost, I thought of these two wonderful strands of DNA that weave in and out of each other from Scripture. The first one is, do not squander your fortune, like the prodigal son. Don't squander it. And the other one is, what does it profit a person if they gain the whole world and lose their soul? Folks, to be talking about the economy and money and our savings, I understand it. Don't get me wrong. I'm just as practical as you are. But it is absurd in this day and age and world that we live in to focus much energy on that. My God. You know, if predictions hold, we're talking about 350 to 400,000 people dead in America by Easter. That means more than Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, all of them put together. This is really such a sublime, and I do mean the word sublime, spiritual issue. It's like, okay, well, what matters to you? What are your priorities? What counts to you? Folks, all I can tell you is this. As a minister, I've done well over 1,000 funerals. I have done all different kinds of bedside services and prayers with those people who are facing their final hours, and never, ever, not even once, did I hear anyone say, geez, I wish I would have made more money. Boy, do I wish I had more time to buy that. Do you realize how simple the stuff is that people want at the end? I just want another walk, another hug, another good movie with a bowl of popcorn. You know what I mean? It's the littlest stuff. And we have all of that. That's the interesting thing. That's the fortune. Don't squander it. That's our fortune, our lives. People ask me a lot these days about how do I feel about going out to Vermont, and I'm anxious about it, and because it's a change. This is my hometown forever. There's lots of good things here that I still love, that I won't miss. But I have never been so laser focused on what matters in my whole life. I've just never been this focused of, okay, I'm going to be a good grandpa, I'm going to be a good dad, I'm going to be a good neighbor, I'm going to write some good stuff, I'm going to paint some things I think are beautiful, and I'm going to try to make a difference. I'm going to try to offer. You know what I'm going to do? My biggest thing that I want to do when I get others, every day I want to make somebody's day. That's the least I can do. You know how easy that is to make somebody's day? It's so easy to make somebody's day. The second thing that I want to get back to the basics on is to recognize the fact that the foundation of the faith in Jesus is fundamentally mercy, forgiveness. And if there's one thing that Christians are truly crappy at, it's forgiveness. Unbelievable. We have more excuses than Carter's got liver pills why we can't forgive. It's nuts. I really want to work on that. I just really want to work on that element of forgiving and forgiving, you know. I remember this so clearly. I went to a funeral with my mother and my dad for a neighbor by the name of Lib. A woman who I can tell you my mother could not stand. I didn't know why we were going to this funeral, other than she was a neighbor. We did know her. My mom did like her kids. But the whole sermon at the church that we went to, the priest gave this sermon, and it was all about heaven. Even then, as a little boy, I remember thinking, how do these guys talk about heaven like they were there on Tuesday? You know, they're describing it in detail, and the roads, and the, you know, I'm thinking, well, where is it? You know? And the thing that I have, well, I will admit that by the end of this guy's sermon, you know, I was almost nodding off, and I thought, well, you know, basically, I think heaven must be, it's like a good long sleep, you know, gee. But when we got home, my mother was making up lunch, etc. And my sister, who had also gone to the funeral, who had this very wicked smile and this chiclet grin that you'd give only to my mother. It's a thing between daughters and mothers. It really is. And she goes, well, Mom, Liv's gonna be in heaven. I bet you can't wait. Ooh. That's why boy, when that movie came out, Mean Girls, I thought, ooh, I know that book. You know? My mother very calmly looked up and said, well, if she is there, I'm not going. That was it. That was it. That was the end of the subject. I'm not going. You know, I'm done. I'm out of here. Folks, do you realize something? How much people within the church argue about who's going to heaven and who's not? Like we know? Like somebody knows the answer to that? None of us know who's going to heaven. None of us will ever know, no matter how hard we try, who's going. And then when people say, well, I know because the Bible tells me so. Well, the Bible told all of the Ku Klux Klan to believe in Jesus as their Lord and Savior. I don't know how Jesus feels about sharing company with that crew. So I don't know. But I really do have faith. I have faith. Now, the last thing I want to share, in the end of this sermon, I told Kay, I said, Kay, you know it's going to be long. And she, you know, Kay has this wonderful way of smiling at you while she's rolling her eyes. Okay? Which is sort of her way of saying, yes, we'll get through it. I'm not happy. You know? And I'm like, But the reality is,